Welcome to Soft Spoken Mysteries. Tonight we're exploring two murder cases that remained frozen in time until modern forensic science brought them back to life. In our first story, we'll journey to a frozen mountain pass in the Alps, where in 1991, hikers stumbled upon what they thought was a recent mountaineering accident. Instead, they discovered the oldest murder case in human history. Ötzi the Iceman had been dead for 300 years, but the arrow in his back told investigators this was no natural death. Then we'll travel to ancient Egypt, where a mummy named Takabuti rested peacefully in a museum for over 160 years. Everyone believed she died of natural causes. Until 2020, when cutting-edge technology revealed the shocking truth, she'd been violently murdered with a weapon of war. Two ancient victims. Two cold cases spanning millennia, both solved by the relentless pursuit of truth. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Picture the year 1991, the Tyrolean Alps, straddling the border between Austria and Italy. September 19th. The summer melt has been particularly aggressive this year, revealing secrets the ice has kept hidden for thousands of years. Two German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, are making their way across a high mountain pass called Thebes, more than 10,000 feet above sea level. The landscape is stark, beautiful, unforgiving. Glacial ice, exposed rock, thin air that makes every step feel heavier than the last. As they navigate around a rocky gully, something catches their eye. Something brown and leathery, partially emerging from the melting ice. At first they assume it's trash, perhaps debris left by other hikers, but as they move closer, the shape becomes disturbingly clear. It's a human body, face down in the ice, one arm extended as if reaching for something just out of grasp. The Simons immediately alert authorities. Mountain rescue teams arrive, assuming they're dealing with a tragic but relatively recent mountaineering accident. People die in these mountains every year. Exposure, falls, avalanches. The body appears well preserved, the leather-like skin suggesting the person died perhaps a few decades ago, maybe during World War II when soldiers crossed these passes. But something doesn't quite fit. The clothing looks strange. The equipment scattered around the body seems archaic. Handcrafted tools, a copper axe, an unfinished bow. When archaeologists arrive to examine the site more closely, they realize something extraordinary. This isn't a modern hiker at all. Radiocarbon dating would soon reveal the stunning truth. The man in the ice died approximately 3,300 BCE, over 5,000 years ago, before the pyramids were built, before Stonehenge was completed. This frozen corpse represented a direct window into the Copper Age, a time we knew almost nothing about, because virtually no human remains from that era had ever been found so perfectly preserved. They named him Ötzi after the Ötztal Valley where he was discovered. Ötzi wasn't just old, he was extraordinarily well preserved. Unlike Egyptian mummies, which had been deliberately prepared with organs removed and preservative chemicals applied, Ötzi had simply been frozen where he fell. The humid climate of the glacier kept his organs, skin, even his tattoos remarkably intact. Scientists could see his brown eyes, his brown hair. They could determine he was approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, around 45 years old, with a gravelly voice based on the structure of his larynx. They found partially healed fractures, signs of arthritis, evidence of intestinal parasites and Lyme disease. His last meal sat preserved in his stomach: ibex meat and fat, red deer, einkorn wheat, bracken fern, possibly taken medicinally or accidentally ingested. He'd eaten this meal roughly 1 hour before he died. The 61 tattoos covering his body, simple lines and crosses, appeared to mark acupuncture points, corresponding to areas where he suffered from joint degeneration and arthritis. Was this primitive medicine? Pain management from 5,000 years ago? His equipment told stories too. The copper axe with its yew wood handle was a valuable possession, almost pure copper, expertly crafted. His clothing included a leather coat stitched from multiple sheepskins and goatskins, a bearskin hat, shoes stuffed with grass for insulation, a quiver containing 14 arrows, only 2 of them finished with flint points and fletching. Everything about Ötzi suggested he was not a random wanderer, but someone of status and skill. A hunter, a craftsman, someone who knew these mountains. For the first few years after his discovery, scientists believed Ötzi had simply succumbed to the harsh alpine environment. Perhaps caught in a sudden storm, perhaps exhausted and injured, unable to continue. He'd laid down in that gully and frozen to death, a tragic but natural end. Then in 2001, a decade after his discovery, everything changed. A radiologist named Paul Gostner was examining new X-rays and CT scans of Ötzi's body. Medical imaging technology had advanced significantly in 10 years, allowing for much more detailed analysis. Deep in Ötzi's left shoulder, Gostner spotted something that previous examinations had missed: a small dense object, a flint arrowhead lodged near his shoulder blade. The discovery transformed everything. This wasn't a case of death by exposure. This was homicide, murder, the oldest confirmed murder in human history. But who killed him, and why? These questions launched what would become the most extensively investigated cold case ever, a forensic examination spanning 5,000 years. Scientists brought together an unprecedented array of modern forensic techniques to investigate this ancient crime. CT scans revealed the precise path of the arrow and the damage it caused. Archaeobotany analysed pollen and plant matter in his digestive system to track his movements. Paleometallurgy examined his tools and weapons. Blood analysis identified DNA from 4 different people on his clothing and equipment. In 2007, Detective Chief Inspector Alexander Horn of the Munich Police Department was invited to apply his homicide investigation experience to Ötzi's case. Horn was skeptical at first. How could he investigate a murder that occurred before written history, before civilization as we know it? But as he examined the evidence, Horn realized this crime scene told a remarkably clear story. The arrow wound was the key. The flint arrowhead had entered Ötzi's back from behind and slightly below, striking his left subclavian artery. This is the main circulatory pipeline carrying oxygenated blood from the heart to the left arm. The 1 centimetre tear in this artery would have caused catastrophic internal bleeding. Ötzi would have gone into hemorrhagic shock almost immediately. He would have lost consciousness within moments and died within 2 to 3 minutes. There was no surviving this wound, not with Copper Age medicine. The depth and angle of penetration told Horn something crucial about the attack. The arrowhead remained lodged in Ötzi's body rather than passing through. This meant the arrow was shot from a distance. Horn estimated approximately 30 metres away. If Ötzi had been shot at close range, the kinetic energy would have driven the arrowhead completely through his body and out the other side. Instead, it buried itself near the shoulder blade and stayed there. This was a distance killing, an ambush. Ötzi never saw his attacker, but there was more to the story, much more. Ötzi's right hand bore a deep defensive wound between his thumb and forefinger, cutting all the way to the bone. The wound had begun to heal slightly, indicating it was 1 or 2 days old when he died. Horn recognized this immediately. He'd seen thousands of wounds in his career as a detective, and this was a classic active defense injury. The kind you get when you grab at a blade, when you're fighting for your life. 1 or 2 days before his murder, Ötzi had been in a violent physical altercation, and based on the fact that this was his only significant injury, he'd won that fight. The evidence from his digestive system added another layer to the story. Pollen analysis revealed Ötzi's movements in his final days. The pollen in his stomach and intestines came from different altitudes, different environments, allowing scientists to track his path like breadcrumbs. Approximately 12 hours before his death, Ötzi had been down in the valley, at an altitude of around 4,000 feet, where hop hornbeams and other lowland trees grew. Then he descended rapidly, climbing thousands of feet up the mountain. He'd eaten his final meal in a subalpine coniferous forest before continuing his climb to the high pass where he died. This wasn't the pattern of a casual hike or a hunting expedition. This was someone fleeing, someone moving fast and hard up the mountain, putting distance between himself and something or someone. The botanical evidence became even more revealing. Among the plant matter found at the death site were species of moss that don't grow at that high altitude, specifically flat Neckera moss, a species used historically for caulking boats and cabins, which only grows in lower valleys to the south, in what is now Italy. Ötzi must have carried this moss with him, either accidentally on his clothing and equipment, or perhaps intentionally as part of his supplies. Either way, it told investigators that he'd descended into the southern valleys before making his final, fatal climb. Here's how Detective Horn reconstructed the crime. 1 or 2 days before Ötzi's death, he was down in the valley settlement. Something happened there. A violent confrontation. A fight. Ötzi defended himself with a blade, suffering the cut to his hand, and emerged victorious. But winning the fight wasn't the end of it. For reasons we can only speculate about, Ötzi knew he had to leave, fast. He gathered his belongings, including his valuable copper axe, his unfinished bow, his arrows, his tools. He began climbing, ascending thousands of feet up treacherous mountain paths. Was he running from retribution? Had he killed someone in that fight, making him a wanted man? Was this a blood feud, a personal vendetta, a territorial dispute? We don't know. But Ötzi climbed for hours, descending briefly into valleys before climbing again, pushing himself toward the high pass at Tisenjoch. Perhaps he thought he'd be safe there, at over 10,000 feet. Perhaps he was trying to reach another settlement on the other side of the mountains. He stopped to eat, consuming that final meal of ibex and deer meat. Then he continued climbing to the pass, and there his pursuer caught up with him. The killer was skilled. This wasn't a clumsy, panicked attack. The arrow was shot from 30 meters away, from behind and below. Ötzi was struck in the back without warning, the arrowhead severing his subclavian artery with devastating precision. Such accuracy suggests the killer was an experienced hunter, someone who knew exactly where to aim. Prehistoric hunters deliberately targeted the left shoulder area of large game animals because it provided the most direct route to vital organs and major blood vessels. Ötzi's killer was likely a hunter who applied those same techniques to human prey. Ötzi collapsed. He fell forward into the rocky gully, his left arm bent across his chest, his right arm extended. Within 2 or 3 minutes, he was dead. What happened next reveals the killer's presence at the death scene. The arrow shaft was missing. Among Ötzi's quiver of arrows, perfectly preserved after 5,000 years, there was no sign of the fatal arrow's shaft. Only the flint arrowhead remained in his body. The killer tried to remove the arrow, likely to destroy evidence. In the Copper Age, arrows were distinctive. The construction, the materials, the craftsmanship, these could identify the maker and owner as clearly as modern ballistics can trace a bullet to a specific gun. But when the killer tried to yank out the arrow, the shaft snapped, leaving the arrowhead buried deep in Ötzi's shoulder. Unable to retrieve it without completely desecrating the body, the killer abandoned the attempt and left the broken tip behind. And here's what's truly revealing. The killer didn't take any of Ötzi's possessions. The copper axe, worth a fortune in that era, remained at the scene. The tools, the clothing, the partially finished bow, everything was left untouched. If this was a robbery, the killer would have taken these valuable items, especially the copper axe, which represented a massive investment of resources and skill. But taking the axe would have been dangerous. Such a distinctive object appearing in someone's possession would immediately mark them as Ötzi's killer to anyone who recognized it. This wasn't about theft. This was personal. This was revenge, or blood feud, or some other conflict we can only guess at from our vantage point 5,000 years in the future. There's one more detail that suggests the killer was present after Ötzi died. The position of his body is unusual. His arms are extended in a way that appears unnatural, not how someone would naturally fall or arrange themselves while dying. Some investigators believe Ötzi was shot elsewhere, perhaps on the ridge above the gully, and was then dragged by his arms down into the depression where he was found. The killer may have tried to conceal the body, covering it with snow or rocks, hoping the crime would never be discovered. If so, the killer was nearly successful. For 300 years, Ötzi remained hidden in his icy grave, frozen, preserved, forgotten. Until 1991, when two German hikers noticed something brown and leathery emerging from the melting glacier. The question that haunts every investigator, every scientist who studied this case, is simply this: who was Ötzi's killer? We know it was almost certainly a man. Hunting and warfare were predominantly male activities in Copper Age societies. We know he was skilled with a bow, familiar with killing techniques, someone who understood anatomy well enough to place a lethal shot from 30 meters away. The blood evidence on Ötzi's clothing adds another layer of mystery. DNA analysis identified blood from 4 different people on his coat, his knife, and one of his arrows. Ötzi's blood, obviously, but also blood from 3 other individuals. 2 different people's blood was found on the same arrow, suggesting Ötzi had killed or wounded 2 people with that single arrow and recovered it both times. Another person's blood was on his coat, possibly from carrying a wounded comrade over his shoulders. This paints a picture of recent violence extending beyond just the fight where Ötzi suffered his hand wound. He'd been involved in multiple violent encounters in his final days. Was he part of a raiding party, a defender of his settlement, a warrior caught in clan warfare? Some researchers theorize Ötzi was part of a larger conflict, possibly a territorial dispute between valley communities. The tattoos on his body, particularly their placement at acupuncture points, suggest he suffered chronic pain, perhaps from old injuries sustained in previous fights. Others believe this was more intimate, a personal vendetta, a love triangle, a property dispute that escalated to murder. In small Copper Age communities, everyone knew everyone. Ötzi and his killer almost certainly knew each other. Detective Horn offered his professional assessment. Whoever killed Ötzi didn't act on impulse. The distance of the shot, the precision, the effort to retrieve the arrow, this was someone who planned the murder, who followed Ötzi into the mountains specifically to kill him. The motive remains speculation. Was it revenge for Ötzi killing someone in that earlier fight? Was it about the copper axe or other valuable possessions, despite the killer not taking them? Was Ötzi an outlaw, being hunted by his own community? Or was he fleeing political enemies, perhaps from a rival clan or settlement? We'll never know the killer's identity. We'll never hear their justification if they had one. We'll never know if they felt remorse or satisfaction, fear or triumph. But what we do know is extraordinary. Through Ötzi, we can see into a world that otherwise would be completely lost to time. The Copper Age left us no written records, no detailed accounts of daily life, no first-hand testimonies, just fragments, stone tools, pottery shards, scattered graves. Ötzi is different. He's a complete human being, frozen at a specific moment in history, carrying with him everything he owned, everything he'd eaten, every injury he'd sustained. He's a time capsule from 3300 BCE, speaking to us across 5 millennia. His murder tells us something profound about human nature. That conflict, violence, revenge, these aren't modern inventions. That people 5,000 years ago felt the same passions, the same grudges, the same desperate need to survive that we feel today. Ötzi died alone on that mountain pass, struck down by an enemy whose identity is lost to history. His body was covered by snow, then ice, and there he remained, the ultimate cold case, until warming temperatures and two curious hikers brought him back into the light. Today, Ötzi rests in a specially designed cold cell at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, maintained at exactly -6 degrees Celsius and 98% humidity, the same conditions that preserved him for 5,000 years. Visitors can look at him through a small window, this ancient murder victim who became one of the most studied human beings in history. Scientists continue examining Ötzi using ever more sophisticated technology to extract new secrets from his body. Every few years, a new discovery emerges, a new detail about his diet, his health, his movements, his life, but the identity of his killer. That secret died with both of them 5,300 years ago on a frozen mountain pass in the Alps. And now, let's turn to another ancient murder mystery, one that remained hidden for even longer, concealed not by ice but by the very wrappings meant to preserve the victim for eternity. Imagine Belfast, Northern Ireland, 1834. The city is experiencing a surge of interest in Egyptian antiquities, part of a broader Victorian fascination with ancient Egypt that's sweeping through Europe. Egypt represents mystery, exoticism, a civilization so ancient and accomplished that it both fascinates and intimidates Western scholars. Thomas Gregg, a wealthy Belfast merchant, purchases an Egyptian mummy. It's a spectacular acquisition, a fully wrapped mummy in excellent condition, complete with an elaborate painted cartonnage covering and hieroglyphic inscriptions identifying the deceased. Her name is Takabuti. She was a young woman from Thebes, a member of the elite class who lived during Egypt's 25th dynasty, around 660 BCE. Her name translates roughly to one favoured by the god of the two lands, a name that suggests status, privilege, a life of relative comfort in one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. The mummy becomes a prized possession of the Gregg family before eventually being donated to the Belfast Museum, now the Ulster Museum. For nearly 2 centuries, Takabuti rests in her display case, a beautiful but silent representative of ancient Egypt. Visitors admire the intricate wrappings, the painted decorations, the mysterious hieroglyphs that tell of her life and burial. Everyone assumes Takabuti died of natural causes. Why wouldn't they? She was young, estimated to be in her early 20s at death. But she was also living in ancient Egypt, where disease, infection, and childbirth complications claimed many young lives. There's nothing to suggest anything sinister, but Takabuti is keeping a secret, and modern science is about to expose it. In 2020, a team of researchers from the University of Manchester, Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust, the K&H Centre for Biomedical Egyptology, and Kingsbridge Private Hospital decided to subject Takabuti to the most comprehensive analysis ever attempted on her remains. Previous examinations over the decades had revealed some information. In the 1960s, when she was partially unwrapped for study, researchers determined Takabuti's age, noted her good dental health, and observed that her organs had been carefully removed and separately preserved according to mummification customs, standard procedure for an elite burial. But the 2020 investigation employed cutting-edge technology that didn't exist even a decade before. Advanced CT scanning, high-resolution X-rays, DNA sequencing, radiocarbon dating refined to unprecedented accuracy. These tools would allow researchers to see inside Takabuti's body without further disturbing her wrappings, to analyse her at the molecular level. Dr. Greer Ramsey, the curator leading the investigation, expected to learn more about Takabuti's life, her diet, her health, perhaps evidence of diseases that were common in ancient Egypt. Maybe they'd confirm the exact cause of death, adding certainty to what had been assumptions. What they found instead shocked everyone. The CT scans revealed something that decades of previous examinations had missed. Deep within Takabuti's torso, concealed by her wrappings and the preserved tissue, was a wound. A significant, violent trauma that had severed her aorta. This wasn't disease. This wasn't natural causes. This wasn't an accident. Takabuti had been murdered. The revelation transformed the investigation overnight. This wasn't just a study of an ancient Egyptian woman anymore. This was a homicide investigation, a cold case from 2,260 years ago. The research team brought in forensic pathologists to analyze the injury. What they determined was chilling in its precision and brutality. Takabuti had been stabbed. The weapon had entered her upper back, traveling downward and forward, penetrating deep into her torso. The angle of entry and the catastrophic damage suggested a weapon approximately 4 to 6 inches in length, wielded with considerable force. Most tellingly, the blade had severed Takabuti's aorta, the main artery carrying blood from the heart to the rest of the body. This injury would have caused massive internal bleeding. Death would have come quickly, within minutes, as she bled out internally. But here's where the forensic analysis became even more revealing. Further examination of the wound structure and comparisons with known ancient Egyptian weapons led researchers to a stunning conclusion about what kind of weapon killed Takabuti. It was an axe, specifically a military-style axe of a type commonly used by both Egyptian and Assyrian soldiers during the 25th dynasty. This wasn't a domestic dispute escalating into violence with a kitchen knife. This wasn't a random street attack with an improvised weapon. This was a military weapon designed for battle, used with lethal effectiveness against a young woman who likely never saw the blow coming. The implications cascade outward like ripples in water. Why would someone use a military axe to kill Takabuti? Who had access to such weapons? What was happening in Egypt during her lifetime that might explain this brutal murder? Context becomes crucial. Takabuti lived during Egypt's 25th dynasty, also known as the Nubian or Kushite dynasty. This was a period of significant political upheaval and military conflict. The 25th dynasty rulers came from Nubia, the region to Egypt's south, and had taken control of Egypt during a period of internal weakness. They presented themselves as restorers of proper Egyptian traditions, champions of the old ways, legitimate pharaohs in the eyes of the gods. But not everyone accepted their rule. Egypt was fragmenting, with various nobles and princes controlling different regions, sometimes cooperating with the Nubian pharaohs, sometimes resisting them. And from the east, a new threat was emerging. Assyria. The Assyrian Empire, one of the ancient world's most formidable military powers, began pushing into Egyptian territory during Takabuti's lifetime. Assyrian armies equipped with iron weapons and sophisticated siege tactics represented an existential threat to Egyptian independence. In 671 BCE, just a few decades before Takabuti's death, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt, capturing the capital at Memphis and forcing the 25th dynasty pharaoh Taharqa to flee south to Nubia. Though Egyptian forces eventually expelled the Assyrians temporarily, the invasions continued. In 666 BCE, Assyrian forces returned and sacked Thebes itself, Takabuti's home city. It's against this backdrop of invasion, occupation and violence that Takabuti met her end around 660 BCE. The fact that she was killed with a military-style axe suggests several possibilities. Was she caught in the crossfire during one of these conflicts? Did Assyrian soldiers attack her? Or was it Egyptian or Nubian soldiers in the chaos of war? Another theory emerges when we consider her social status. Takabuti was elite. Her mummification was expensive, carefully done, complete with elaborate wrappings and painted decorations. Her family had resources, they had status. This makes her a potential target in ways that a peasant or labourer would not be. In times of political upheaval, elite families often find themselves in danger. supporting the wrong faction, having connections to deposed rulers, possessing wealth that others covet. Any of these could mark someone for violence. Was Takabuti killed because of her family's political affiliations? Was this an assassination, eliminating someone connected to a particular faction in Egypt's fractured political landscape? Or was this more personal, despite the military weapon? Perhaps someone with military training, someone who had access to weapons of war, used them to settle a private score. Love affairs, inheritance disputes, personal grudges, these motives for murder are as old as humanity itself. The DNA analysis added another fascinating twist to Takabuti's story. Her genetic profile revealed something unexpected. Her DNA showed more similarity to modern European populations than to modern Egyptian populations. This doesn't mean Takabuti was European. Rather, it reflects the complex genetic mixing that occurred throughout the Mediterranean and Near East over thousands of years, and the significant population changes that have occurred in Egypt since her time. But it does suggest she may have had ancestry from different regions, fitting with Egypt's role as a crossroads of trade and culture. Whatever the specific circumstances of her death, one thing is clear: Takabuti's murder was covered up, not by destroying her body or hiding the crime, but by preserving her with all the honor and ceremony befitting her social status. Someone, probably her family, ensured Takabuti received a proper burial. Her body was carefully mummified, wrapped according to tradition, placed in the protective embrace of painted cartonnage, and interred with the appropriate religious texts and imagery to guide her journey to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptian embalmers who prepared her body would have seen the wound. They would have known this was violent death, but they said nothing. The hieroglyphs on her wrappings make no mention of murder, no accusation, no call for justice. This silence tells its own story. In ancient Egypt, dying by violence was considered a bad death, one that could jeopardize the deceased's journey to the afterlife. It was shameful, unlucky, a stain on the family's honor. By mummifying Takabuti and burying her with all appropriate ceremony, her family was attempting to overcome the circumstances of her death. They were giving her the afterlife she deserved, despite the violence that ended her earthly existence. But who killed her? And why? These questions have no answers. The investigation that began in 2020 can tell us how Takabuti died with stunning precision: the weapon, the angle of attack, the specific injury, the speed of death. Modern forensic science paired with archaeological expertise can reconstruct the final moments of her life with remarkable clarity. But motive and perpetrator? Those secrets died with everyone who witnessed the crime, buried in unmarked graves or lost to time 2,860 years ago. Dr. Greer Ramsey, reflecting on the discovery, noted the profound strangeness of studying a murder victim who's been dead for over 2.5 millennia. Takabuti has been with us in Belfast for 185 years, Ramsey said, displayed in our museum, visited by thousands of people. And all that time she was keeping this secret. No one knew she'd been murdered until we could finally see inside her body without disturbing her wrappings. The research findings were published in 2020, and the revelation captured global attention. Major news outlets covered the story. The murder of Takabuti became a focal point for discussions about ancient violence, the capabilities of modern forensic science, and the mysteries still concealed in museum collections around the world. Because here's the unsettling truth: Takabuti is likely not unique. Museums worldwide house thousands of Egyptian mummies, most of which have never been subjected to the kind of comprehensive forensic analysis that revealed Takabuti's secret. How many of them also died violently? How many other murders have been concealed for millennia beneath linen wrappings and painted cartonnage? Some researchers estimate that a significant percentage of ancient Egyptian deaths may have been violent, especially during periods of political upheaval like the one Takabuti lived through. War, assassination, domestic violence, robbery, all would have claimed lives just as they do today. But in many cases, the families would have had the resources and motivation to conceal the violent nature of the death through proper mummification and burial, to give their loved one a chance at a successful afterlife, despite the circumstances of their earthly departure. Modern technology is beginning to pierce these ancient veils of secrecy. CT scanning and other non-invasive techniques allow researchers to examine mummies without unwrapping them, preserving their integrity while revealing their secrets, and the secrets are emerging. In recent years, researchers have identified multiple Egyptian mummies who died violently, pharaohs who were assassinated in palace coups, workers who were crushed in construction accidents, women who died in childbirth, men who were stabbed, struck, or strangled. Each discovery adds another piece to our understanding of ancient Egyptian life. Not just the monumental architecture and sophisticated culture, but the violence, conflict, and human drama that existed beneath the surface of civilization. Takabuti now rests back in her display case at the Ulster Museum, but visitors see her differently now. She's not just a beautiful artifact, a symbol of ancient Egyptian culture. She's a murder victim, a young woman whose life was cut short by violence, a person who suffered, who died afraid and in pain, who was mourned by family and friends. We'll never know. The museum has updated her exhibition to reflect the new findings. The display now acknowledges the violent circumstances of her death, the ongoing mystery of who killed her and why, and the remarkable forensic investigation that finally revealed the truth after 2,660 years. In a way, there's something profound about finally giving Takabuti this acknowledgement. For over 2 millennia, her murder was a secret, concealed by her family's desire to ensure her proper burial. Then, for nearly 2 centuries in Belfast, she was known but misunderstood, her cause of death assumed to be natural. Now, finally, the truth is known. Takabuti was murdered, violently, with a weapon of war, by someone whose identity is lost to history. She deserves to be remembered, not just as an Egyptian mummy, not just as a museum artifact, but as a person. A young woman named Takabuti, who lived in Thebes 2,660 years ago, who experienced the joys and sorrows of life in ancient Egypt, and who died far too young at the hands of someone who used a soldier's axe to end her life. The investigation continues. Researchers hope that future technology may reveal even more about Takabuti, perhaps details about her final days, her health, her diet, anything that might provide additional context about the circumstances surrounding her death, but the core mystery, who killed her and why, may never be solved. Some secrets are buried too deep, lost too completely to the passage of time. 2 murder victims, 2 ancient cold cases, one frozen in alpine ice for 300 years, one wrapped in linen and hidden in a museum display for 2,260 years. Ötzi, the Iceman, and Takabuti, the mummy. Separated by geography, by culture, by over 2,000 years of history, but united by the violence that ended their lives and the modern forensic science that finally revealed their secrets. Both cases remind us that murder is not a modern invention. Violence is not a recent development in human history. People have been killing each other for as long as people have existed, over territory, resources, grudges, passions, politics, and reasons we can only guess at from our distant vantage point. But both cases also demonstrate something hopeful: the relentless human drive to uncover truth, to solve mysteries, to give voice to victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Modern science, paired with careful investigation and respect for the dead, can bridge thousands of years to reveal secrets that were thought permanently hidden. Ötzi's killer escaped justice 5,300 years ago, vanishing into the mists of prehistory. Takabuti's killer was never caught, never held accountable for wielding that military axe against a young woman in Thebes, but we know about them now. We know their stories. We remember them not as anonymous remains, but as people, individuals who lived, who died violently, who deserve to be remembered. And perhaps that's a kind of justice. Perhaps being seen, being known, being mourned across the millennia, perhaps that's something. If you found tonight's investigations thought-provoking, please share this episode with others who appreciate the mysteries of the past. And if you have theories about these ancient murders, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Just remember to be respectful. These were real people, with real families who mourned them. Tomorrow we'll explore more mysteries from the shadows of history. Until then, take care. This has been Soft Spoken Mysteries.